for your father if you were not able to do that, which is a wonderful thing. We all have fathers. I've had them, and mostly the thing that impacts your life almost more than anything else is your father. We're all living for either the respect or in response to our fathers. And so just for fun today, I decided I'll call my kids. It's Father's Day. So I dialed them and said, hey, have anything you want to say to me? And that was pretty, I got one more to call yet, but anyways, that was fun. Glad to have you all here tonight. I can't even hardly imagine talking about anything more important than what we talked about this morning with how we are seated in the heavenlies. I hope that was helpful to you. An introduction. It'll come up 4 more times in the book of Ephesians, and it will be wonderful. But I'm looking tonight at Proverbs chapter 30. I would love for you to join me there. And as you're turning to Proverbs chapter 30, let me give you sort of a roadmap or a plan. I plan to study, if the Lord doesn't return before we're done with our service tonight, Proverbs 30, complete that tonight. And the next time we come to the book of Proverbs, in completion, I'll be looking at the virtuous woman of chapter 31. So we love that chapter, so many wonderful things to look at there, and then we will have completed that study of this incredible book. It's a long haul, frankly, to go through the book of Proverbs. I think you might have recognized that along the way. Just a little bit of stroll down memory lane. The first 9 chapters were all introduction. That is a long introduction to a book where Solomon is reminding his son to pursue wisdom. Chapter 9 is where the Proverbs of Solomon begin, and they go all the way to chapter 25, the Proverbs of Solomon. In chapter 25, all the way to chapter 29 were the Proverbs that Hezekiah had collected, and his group of Proverbs basically revolved around the kingdom, establishing principles of leadership. I spent numerous times there. I hope it was of benefit to you. There are so many books on leadership out there. Everyone wants to write a book on leadership, and they use psychology, and they use all kinds of stuff. I've yet to see anyone go to this section, 25 through 29, and deal with leadership the way that it has been given to us in the Scripture. Chapter 30 is this guy we know nothing about, whose name is Augur, and I would remind you perhaps that it wasn't that long ago I preached a sermon on the first few verses about how he is saying that he is giving words that are inspired by God. The word utterance in verse 1 of chapter 30 tells us that this is a divine oracle. And that is unique in the book of Proverbs. Even though Solomon wrote it or Hezekiah collected, here's this guy, Augur, whoever he is, he's admitting, claiming that the words he's speaking are the words of God and not the words of man. And I won't rehearse anything about what I said when we talked about it in the past. We're just going to finish up with the divine words, the utterances that Augur has received, and then we'll finish with chapter 31, and we'll talk about King Lemuel, who we don't know anything about either. So we'll complete that, and that will be great. The book of Proverbs is written that we would learn to fear God, not that we would live the good life. We don't need to live the good life, but that we would live a life that is good, a life that is beneficial. Don't waste your life is essentially what he's teaching us, and the fear of the Lord is the pathway to that wisdom. One person said, what notes are to music, so the fear of the Lord is to wisdom. It sings the tune. It writes the words so that we would learn to fear God in all we do. So who is this guy, Augur, and what can we learn from him? Well, again, we don't know at what point in the kingdom he reigned. I'm inclined to say that he was around during the time of Hezekiah and was one of Hezekiah's wise men, one of his inspired writers, though we don't know that for sure, but it does seem to have that feel to it. Secondly, we know that he gave us a warning: don't add to the Bible and don't take away from the Bible. Remember, in the book of Deuteronomy, we are given that very same warning: don't add to the Scriptures, don't take away the Scriptures. In the middle of the Bible, we are told, don't add to the Scriptures, don't take away from the Scriptures. And in the end of the Bible, in the book of Revelation, the very same thing: don't add to the Scriptures and don't take away from the Scriptures, because if you take away from the Scriptures, God will take away your part from the tree of life, which doesn't mean you're going to lose your salvation, though it may sound like that. The point is simply this: those who would destroy the Scriptures manifest that they are not on their way to heaven. They have no relationship with God if they won't hear His Word. And again, that's exactly what we learned in 1 John chapter 4, that those who are of God hear us. Or 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 18, that you receive the word that we preached as it really was, the word of God, and not the word of men. So let's look down at the chapter a little bit, and I want to go all the way down to verse 7. That's where we're going to start, and we'll look through the text. And I want to frame it. I have to frame it one more time. So before you're ready to read and say, hey, let's get going on what it actually says, it's kind of like he's a math professor. There are 5 different times when he puts together 4 characteristics, 4 illustrations, 4 patterns, or 4 ways that things are alike. So 5 different times there are 3 things and 4, and then there are 4, and then there are 4, and if I counted right, there are 4, and there are 4 things that are placed together. And so he is looking around the world, he is looking at events, he is looking deep into the heart, and he's noticing patterns that happen in our hearts. He's noticing things that occur that we could learn from. And so some of your versions, I know the Legacy Bible, I was pointed, this fact was pointed out to me, has basically put it into groups so that you could recognize this group has one message, and this group of verses has one message, and one message, and one message. But before he deals with 4, he starts with 2, verse 7. There are 2 things that I request from you. Do not deprive me before I die. Remove falsehood and lies far from me. That's the first request. The second request is give me neither poverty nor riches, but feed me with food allotted for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. Now, if you're at all listening to the Bible, if you're familiar with it, you're going to say, didn't somebody else say something else extremely close to that? And you would be right to notice that. It was Jesus when he said, give us this day our daily bread. And I am convinced that Jesus would have had these words in mind when he says that if we would have enough for our daily needs, rather than worrying about getting rich and having an abundance way over the top, that we would be far better off, that our souls would be much more healthy, that we would be able to function as we should. And so Augur says something that almost no one in today's world would say, which is, don't give me too much. How much money is enough money? What did Henry Ford say? Just $1 more. How did he live and how did he die? Because he lived for just $1 more, because he did not live with the requests that are made here in verses 7 and 8 and 9. He died a sorry, happy man, and the moment he died, I became richer than he ever would be again. Because what can a man give in exchange for his soul? He lost everything and became extremely poor because he died. And so Augur says, I don't want to be too rich and I don't want to be too poor. I want to learn to be content with what? With the things that God daily gives to me. I know you feel like, and I feel the same way, that, well, if I could just get ahead a little bit more. If I could just have enough so that there'd be a little bit more month in the week and I could pay my bills and I never really had to, balance my checkbook and there would be enough. And wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be wonderful if that were never the case? And the truth is, you would not be any happier if you had a little bit more. And we should be very careful that we don't live for things. That's really his point here. If I have too much, I'll deny God, I'll forget about him, I won't care for him, I won't put him as appropriate in my life, and if I have too little, then I'm prone to break the 10 Commandments and steal. And so the lesson from this, and by the way, it will come up one more time in this chapter, is we ought to be praying for contentment in our lives. We ought to be content not with what we wished we had, but with what God has given to us. And that is my message. I preached through the Ten Commandments several times. God wants you to be content with what you do have, what He has given you, not with what you wish that you may have. And so we become covetous and we become idolaters when we want things that we're not supposed to have. Covetousness is desiring anything you cannot have. Covetousness is desiring anything that you should not have. Covetousness is desiring anything for selfish reasons. And covetousness is desiring something thinking that it will make your life better. If you are not happy now, if you don't have peace in your soul now, a new car certainly won't give it to you. A new farm or a new house or a new tractor or anything else new along the way won't give you any more peace or joy in your soul if you can't find it with what you have right now. And so I would ask you to stop and say, have I learned to be content with what God has given me? If I haven't learned to be content where I am, it's very certain I won't be content if I had a little bit more along the way. And that is His first piece of wisdom for us as God's people, that we would be able to learn to be content with the things we have. He goes on, by the way, and this is a fascinating section here, looking at verses 11 and following, and he describes a generation. And you'll notice there are 4 different attributes of a generation, and so even though he doesn't list it as 4 things, it is 4 things. And essentially, when he talks about a generation, verse 11 and 12, all the way through 14, these are the things that you could look for that would tell you there is a generation that is lost. There is a generation that is gone. Once you see these characteristics in any generation, it's the terminal generation, and it will not recover. So sadly enough, you might see your own generation, your own society in verses 11, 12, 13, and 14. But let's notice it for a minute. There is a generation that curses its father and does not bless its mother. What an irony, isn't it? To hear something like that on the day that our culture celebrates Father's Day, which is a great thing. Secondly, in verse 12, there is a generation that is pure in its own eyes. These are all continual. Not only do they not honor father and mother, they also think that they are pure and right. There is a generation that is pure in its own eyes, and yet it is not washed from its filthiness. And worse than that, 13, there is a generation, oh, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyes are lifted up. And there is a generation whose teeth are like swords, whose fangs are like knives, to devour the poor from off of the earth and the needy from among men. And I want to read verse 15, because verse 15 relates exactly to these same 2 ideas. The leech has 2 daughters, and they both have the same name. It is give and give, because they are not satisfied. How do you know if you live in a terminal generation, or if you're a part of a generation that is totally lost? A generation that is totally lost is a generation that shows no respect to their father and mother. It is so important that we restore and live out the idea of giving respect to our father and mother. It's not a mistake that it's in the 10 Commandments. Honor your father and mother. And the word for honor there is the same word that is used for honoring and worshiping God. And so we give to our parents in a lesser extent the same kind of worship that we give to the Lord. Give Him glory. And the point in all of that is not that you have to call them on Father's Day, though that would be fine, of course, or send them a letter, or that you would help them on occasion and meet a need. But your life should be a demonstration or a picture and a means by which you can bring them glory. And so we have a saying around here, and after 20 years, it should begin to stick, right? God requires you to honor your parents as long as you live, and not as long as they live. So just because they're gone they've gone on to their eternal reward, doesn't mean that you're free from honoring them. You still need to honor them. And a generation that does not honor its father and mother is a generation that is lost. The second characteristic of a generation that is lost is not in addition to the fact that they don't honor their father and mother, they think that they are self-righteous. They're pure in their own eyes. Their conscience is inverted. Strange thing. Woe to those who call good evil and evil good. Does that sound to anything like the world in which we live? That is exactly the kind of world that we live in. They're calling that which is evil and wicked good, and that which is good evil. And you're now terrorists, right? And you're now bigots and racists because you believe the truth. And those who believe error are the ones who are self-righteous, which tells me that we're walking in step here, going right down the road. Not only do they not show respect to their parents, they think that they are self-righteous and they're doing it. And they are, number 3, filled with overt pride. The idea of overt pride is they look at you. Have you ever met someone like this? You stick out your hand and you want to shake their hand or you want to address them, and just as your hand goes out, they comb their hair, whatever they would do, or they look at you and kind of look away, and they don't even have to say words. The attitude of the heart is seen in their face, and they're so arrogant because they think that they are better than you. A nation, a generation, the point here that gets like that is a generation that is in big trouble. The last characteristic of a generation that is in big trouble is simply this, that they destroy, but notice who they destroy. They're not really stealing from the rich. They're not stealing from those who have everything. They look around at the weak and the feeble and the poor, the people who can't stand to lose anything, and they take it from them. What's the point of all of those things? Well, he describes them as having fangs. And so they're ferocious and they're vicious, and they harm those who are defenseless among them, and they have absolutely, well, it's what the police chief in Los Angeles used to say, they're flatliners. And he would describe it like this, that they could go out and do something, a murder or some other kind of activity, and there wouldn't even be a blip in their conscience in terms of, that was probably wrong, or that wasn't good. Just absolutely, carry through with those things without any remorse whatsoever. And when you get to that point, you know that you are a society or a generation that is lost. If it isn't true in our whole country, and it's not, let's stop and remind ourselves that there are some nice places in the world to live. There are some nice places in our country to live, and even in our county and where we live. But there are some cities that are completely in this kind of generational distinction, and they are lost, and except for the grace of God, they will collapse completely. So with that in mind, I want to begin looking at the number of 4s. We saw 4 characteristics of a generation that is lost, and now we're going to look at verse 16, 4 things that are not satisfied. So look down chapter 30, verse 16, and he's going to list them together, and he's going to observe from the 4 of them one lesson. So there is a lesson in putting the 4 of them together. We'll make a comment about each of them, and then we'll apply it to our own lives and learn what it is that we should learn. 16 says, actually I need to start in the middle of 15. There are 3 things that are never satisfied, and then he has the 4th. And it's kind of like he says, there's 3 things. Oh wait, not 3, but 4. And so this is a ladder of abstraction. And the 4th one is the worst one, if you will, along the way. That never say, enough. I've got all that I want. The grave, the barren womb, the earth that is not filled or satiated with water, and a fire that never says enough. Looking through those 4 of them, you might ask, well, what are the things that are common between all of them? And it's simply this. There's nothing you could ever do to them to make them happy. The grave can never be made happy. You can never put enough bodies in the ground. You can never fill up a cemetery full enough where that cemetery would say, I don't need any more. I have no more need of anyone to come. Frankly, if all of humanity was placed in the grave, it would still not be enough to fill it up. And so there is this irrational way in which the grave is being described as something that is not satisfied. The barren womb is another one, that it will never be happy. A mother who longs for a child and is not able to have a child and wishes that she would have a child, anything other than having a child. In other words, as long as she becomes or continues to be barren in that regard, that aching, that sadness, that longing for something else will never go away. The third characteristic is that of the water. No matter how much water you dump on the earth, it just goes away, it dries up, and it doesn't take a week or 2 weeks. And though we might have got an inch or an inch and a half or an inch and a quarter, give it a couple weeks, and the ground will be hard all over again. The last picture is that of a fire. If you notice this about a fire, you got a fire going, and so you think, I'm going to put it out, and so you throw some extra wood on the fire so that it finally is satisfied, right? Or the fire is burning, and so you dump some gasoline on it so that it can burn completely. Of course, I'm being facetious if you didn't catch that. A fire will never be satisfied by the things that you give it. So looking at the four of them, what lesson do you see for you and me? There's a lesson here for us, and it's very much related to what we've already talked about, which is simply this. If you can't be satisfied with the things that you have, there is nothing that will ever satisfy your soul. We used to sing a song called Only Jesus. Remember that? Can satisfy the soul. If I'm not satisfied with what is in my life, putting a little more in, putting a little bit more on, giving a little more fuel to the fire will never give me satisfaction. Frankly, it just tells us that when we want to be satisfied, we should not be looking for more. We should be looking for contentment with the things that we have. The second list of four, so this is how I'm going to handle it, because I don't want to be here all night dealing with details. I want to bring the major message to you, is that there are four things that are mysterious. And I find those in verses 18 and 19. So we're moving down the line here, jumping down to 18. There are three things which are too wonderful. Oh, wait, see how he does that? There are four. Yes, four which I cannot understand. And here they are. And by the way, as I read them, there's going to be a commonality. There's going to be something related to all of them that's interesting. And there will be a basic lesson that comes out of it. So Augur, who is inspired by God, giving this utterance which God gave to him, is giving us some insight into life. Verse 19, the way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship in the midst of the sea, and the way of a man who is with a virgin. So you look at those four things and you think, well, I don't know what the commonality is there. And the first thing is that none of them is following a road. The word that's describing here, way, is the word derek, and it means a pathway that we go. A ship sails across the water, and even though for a while, it's fascinating, isn't it? For a while you can see as a ship goes by some kind of a wave setting and a wake that it leaves behind, but the water doesn't miss it, and away it goes. You see a bird flying through the air, an eagle, did it leave a trail, chemtrails or something else along the way, so that you could tell where it was? It didn't leave anything behind. It's mysterious, it's unknown, it's incomprehensible. You see a snake go by as it, goes around the rocks and up and down and all over the place. And can you go along and trace it? And all the way it was up on this rock, and then it was on this rock, and it left its footprints, quote unquote, or its tail prints along the way. There's nothing there. And so the point is, there are some things that are really mysterious that we cannot retrace. And because we can't retrace them, because we can't write them down on a map, then we should be very, very careful as we think about them. Here's the lesson. By the way, who's the lesson to? Well, it's probably to a young man. I think that's really where this lesson comes from. If you're taking notes and want to write down what's going on, verses 18 and 19 are an encouragement and a warning to a young man. Be careful how you fall in love. That really is what it's all about. Be careful how you pursue a woman. Be careful how things go, because it's a mystery, first of all, right? You can't follow the pathway. It happens different for everyone. along the way, and we all have known and maybe have even experienced or been through it. You've seen somebody that they're normal, they're clear thinking, and then they fall in love and like they're worthless. They're just gone because something has captured their imagination, and they have a new idol, and that new idol is another person, and because of that, they are in a dangerous way. So here's the lesson. Just as you don't know how a serpent goes across the rock, or how a ship sails through the water, or how an eagle flies through the air, be very cautious when you decide to fall in love and have a relationship with a person. Be aware of how a young man specifically can lose his way and lose his thoughts by falling in love with another person. So I wrote down a note or two to me here. What does this teach me? Young man, keep your wits about you. Keep in control. Keep clear. Make sure that you're following the truth. Constable, who wrote a great set of notes, he says it like this. And I thought, well, he says it better than I do. It pictures the mysterious way by which a couple would fall into love. It is inexplainable. It is wrought with unseen dangers and amazing turns along the way. That is exactly what Augur is wanting to teach us from the text. There are 4 mysterious things that are amazing, and now there are 4 unbearable things that make the earth tremble. Look down at verse 22 and 23. Again, you're very smart folks, and so you can see the pattern, can't you? For 3 things, the earth is perturbed, and there we go again. Wait, there's 4. Yes, for 4 things it cannot bear up. For a servant when he reigns, a fool when he is filled with food, a hateful woman. And let me define this. It could mean a woman who is hated, a scorned woman, or an odious woman who hates others. And different versions take it one way or another way. I guess you could say that both probably are true. Based on which version you're holding on to, you might think of it as a hateful woman or one who is hated. And we'll talk about that in just a minute here. And so he says, for 3 things the earth is perturbed, for 4 it cannot bear up, a servant when he reigns, a fool when he is filled with food, a woman who is scorned, a hateful woman when she is married, and a maidservant who succeeds her mistress. Now when it says the earth is perturbed, it means to tremble. It means to quake. It's the idea that this is just unsettling. This is strange. This is not good. And when people have looked at these verses, they've mentioned one historic individual. And the individual that they've talked about was Adolf Hitler. When Adolf Hitler, who should not have come to power, did come to power, what did he do? He made the world tremble because he was not worthy of the power or the authority that was granted to him. He was not a good leader, and as a servant, he took over and he asserted himself. And because of the fact that he had to assert himself where he had not earned the authority or the right to lead, the world was in a worse place because of it. So a servant comes to power, and he's not capable of using authority correctly when that happens. When you have a bad leader, you have a leader who is not worthy of respect and has not learned how to lead and is not humble in their leadership, it makes the world tremble, number 1. Number 2, when a fool who has no common sense, he finally is rich. That's the point of having food. What's going to happen to a fool when he's rich? Well, he's going to be just like the person who wins the lottery. All these people buy tickets and they think, if I could just win the lottery, my life would be happy. And a third of those who win the lottery go bankrupt within a year or 2. Why? Because they're fools. And having more food won't make any difference. And so a fool, when he comes to power, or when he is full of everything, he won't make good choices. The third way in which the world trembles and quakes is when there is a scorned or a hated woman. And again, it's hard to know which one it is, and I'm not really wise enough or even capable enough to discern. I'll just mention to you that the Septuagint, when they translate it, they view it as the hateful woman. And if that's the case, then what he's saying is, imagine that you marry a person, and this person is a person who is filled with rage.
Just odious is the term that some people used. Walke, he says it like this: it points to an odious, quarrelsome, and unloving woman. She is the opposite of the prudent wife who is described in chapter 31. Woe to the man who marries one of those, of course, that would be no good. And on the other side of the coin, it's just as true, and I want to give equal and fair credit, that if a woman is married to a man and is completely unloved, that is a greatly tragic or an awful thing that should be experienced. And so the last one is, woe to the slave girl when she gains control. There is a biblical example of this. The biblical example of a slave girl who gains control or one-ups her master would be that of Sarah and Hagar. Got my first letters mixed up there. That Sarah wants to have a child and she's not able to have a child, and so they connive a plan, and so Hagar becomes pregnant with Abraham's little baby, and it just messes up the whole world, causes the family and everything in relation to tremble along the way. And so what's the lesson? There are the 4 unbearable things. I could just simply say, don't be unbearable, right? I mean, that's a part of it. But if God elevates you to a leadership position at work or in a church setting or in a national setting, some other place, then be a humble leader who doesn't make the world tremble. Be a leader who doesn't use his power or authority for vengeance, for selfishness, for hatred, or to mistreat people who ought to be loved by you. Those are the lessons that are there. And so it frankly is a lesson in leadership in many different ways. Don't be unbearable. Don't be insufferable. Don't abuse your power. Rule and lead with wisdom and not with vengeance. The next group of 4th. So we're going to move forward here. I only have 2 more of them, and then we'll be done with this chapter. In verse 24 and 25, there are 4 things that are small but are great, and there are lessons in relationship to them too. Augur says, by the inspiration of God, is an utterance from God. Again, a lesson for us in the world. This is how the world works. This is how things are. There are 4 things which are little on the earth, but they are exceedingly prudent, wise. The ant are a people, yet not strong, and they prepare their food in the summer. The rock badger, and it might be a European rabbit, that's the other term for that. They're a feeble folk, and yet they make their homes in the crags. The locusts have no king, and yet they advance in ranks. And the spider skillfully grasps with its hands, and it lives in kings' palaces. And so there are 4 characteristics, again, verse 24 down through 28, that are common with all 4 of these. And the lesson is one. The lesson is simply this: don't be discouraged if you're not a king. Don't be discouraged if you're not a leader. Don't be discouraged if you're just a blue-collar person. You just go to work every day and you feel like you can't make a difference in the world and you'll never get ahead. I'm just a clerk. I'm just a waiter. I'm just working in some workaday kind of thing. Augur is telling you, be faithful where you are. Do the things that are required of you where you are, and God will exalt you and virtually put you in the palace. So don't get discouraged about how little you can do or how insignificant you are. Be industrious. Get up on time. Work hard with the things that God has given to you. Be wise. Make the most of your circumstances. Be prudent and be cautious as you're working. And just as the spider finds herself, or I don't know if it's a him or her, finds themselves, if you will, working in the palace, you may find that before it's over that you yourself are also working in the palace. If you're an industrious person, there is no limit to the kinds of things that can happen in your life. Be self-motivated. Don't wait for someone to tell you what to do. Do the things that you ought to do. Be sure that when you're working somewhere, do what ought to be done before someone tells you to do it. I'm often trying to sit there when I'm in work scenarios, thinking, what else can I do? What else could be done? What would be the next step? How can I help in some way? And so, that's always going through my mind, because I want to anticipate and be ready to serve in whatever way I am capable of doing so. Be skillful, and you will live in a palace. The last of the four, and this is how we're going to deal with this section. I hope that it has been of some value to you. I'm convinced that it is, or else God would not have put it in the Scriptures in terms of the wisdom that it grants to us. But there's one last group of four things, verses 29 through 31. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 29 and following. There are three things which are majestic in pace, and you know what he's going to say, right? Oh yeah, four, which are stately in walk. It is a lion which is mighty among the beasts and does not turn away from any. The greyhound, and we'll discuss what a greyhound is in a minute, because there are about as many opinions about what a greyhound is, or this word is, as there are animals in the woods. A male goat also, and a king whose troops are with him. And of course, which one of them is the important one? Well, it's the king when he has assembled an army. And if you're on his side, you're grateful for that army. And if you're in opposition to him, woe are you. Let's talk about, first of all, the lion. You understand that a lion is a great and a majestic thing, and no one wants to go against it. I think we understand that. What is this thing known as a greyhound? Well, when it uses the word greyhound, it literally means a dog, a greyhound. And the word that's behind it is the idea of that, let me read the list here, that which is strong in its girt, or strong in its loins. Greyhound dogs were around for thousands of years, of course, since creation, at least some of the species, and they were really well known in Egypt, so it wouldn't be surprising if he's thinking of them as this beautiful animal that is able to run. Others have said that this word refers to a war horse, which is a pretty good idea, or a zebra, or a raven, or a starling. And I think some of your versions have one last suggestion, which is a proud rooster. So whichever it is, I mean, who knows? But there's nothing like a rooster. They get underneath your skin and they chase you out of the pen, and they don't recognize that I'm bigger than you. And should you ever come close to me and I get my hands around your neck, you're in big trouble. Despite all of those things, they are bold and they are proud and they are unstoppable, and they will fight until the death. Despite that fact, whatever it is, a male goat or a greyhound or a lion, the point is simply this, that you ought to fear and be respectful of the king and his army when they come to rule and reign. And so I get to the end of it, and I'm going to say, so what in the world did we learn from this chapter? Yes, there were the patterns, 5 different groupings of 4, and that's significant. And if you were teaching this in a Bible study, you could underline them, and you could say, now there are 4 of these, and there's a lesson, and there are 4 of these, and there's a lesson, and there are 4 of these, and there's a lesson. But thankfully to the Lord and to Augur, he tells us what his chapter was all about in the last 2 verses. And so the lesson in his whole chapter is found in verses 32 to 33. And I'm hoping, and Augur would be desiring, that you learned that lesson as you looked at the examples. It's a wonderful way to think through what we could do. And so listen to what he says in his conclusion. If you have been foolish in exalting yourself, or if you have been devising evil, then put your hand to your mouth. For as the churning of milk produces butter, you shake up the jug, you churn it, you're going to get butter if there's cream there. If you put a ring in the nose of a bull, I think that's the idea, that kind of an idea, which is kind of a terrifying proposal. I've been around a couple, we had at least 2 or 3 different bulls that weighed over a ton, and they were dangerous, and they were terrifying, and probably a half a dozen times they tried to kill someone within our family, and so we would wring their nose to bring them under our control a little bit. Notice what he says, and as the wringing of the nose produces blood, so the forcing of wrath produces strife. What was that chapter about? humility. You don't understand everything that's going on in the world. You're not necessarily the king. You might be a servant who is elected to be the president. You might be a slave who becomes a leader. You might be an Adolf Hitler kind of young man who is granted ultimate power in this world. And if those things come to bear on your life, then you better be humble, because that's the only way that you will be successful. And those are the bits of wisdom and the encouragement from Augur, from Proverbs chapter 30. I hope we can apply them to our lives and learn to be God's kind of humble servant wherever we find ourselves. If the Lord doesn't return, we will go to chapter 31 and look at the virtuous woman, and I'm hoping to deal with it a little bit differently than we have in the past, so that it will have an interest to you, and there will be things that we could learn that will make it an encouragement to us. Pray with me now, and we will be dismissed for this evening. Father, we certainly need at least the 5 different examples about how we should be more humble. The world around us is humble. The world around us gives us encouragement and warning to stop thinking that we have it all figured out and that we are safe and secure. And if we would just simply learn to humbly walk with you in our lives, if we would learn to let you take control of our lives, that we would allow you to lead us where we should be led and place us where you want us to be, our lives would be so much better, and the world around us would also be benefited by humble servants. Thank you for the encouragement tonight to be humble. Make us more humble each day. I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, the Lord bless you. That's chapter 30.